Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're not just telling another story. We're traveling back to the frozen edge of the American frontier, where the wind cut like knives and survival meant outsmarting the cold itself. It's 1875, and the Wild West isn't a land of duels or gold tonight. It's a land of silence, snow, and souls who refused to give up. Cowboys sleeping beside their horses, families sealing their cabins with moss to survive minus 40 degrees, fires that had to burn all night, or lives that would end before dawn. This is the untold story of how the American spirit was truly forged, not by bullets, but by blizzards. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes, let the fire crackle softly, and drift with me back to the Wild West, where winter tested the heart of mankind.
Imagine this. It's the winter of 1875. The thermometer has fallen far below what most souls could endure, 40 degrees below zero. The wind screams across the endless plains of the American frontier, tearing through wooden cabins and whipping up clouds of frozen dust. No electricity, no modern heating, only a small flame fighting against the breath of the night. Out here, under a sky heavy with stars and silence, survival was not guaranteed. It was earned hour by hour. The Wild West was never truly tamed, but winter made it cruel. When the snow came early, rivers froze, and horses' hooves turned to stone on the icy ground. Somewhere between the Dakota Territory and the high plains of Montana, a lone cowboy named Jake Morrison pressed onward through the blizzard. His breath crystallized before it even left his lips. The sound of his saddle creaked like breaking bones. He was 32, tough as leather, born from dust and whiskey. But tonight, his courage was small compared to the cold. Jake's story was one of thousands, nameless men riding across the white void of the frontier, hoping for a fire, a roof, or a sunrise. As the storm swallowed the horizon, he muttered the words of an old prayer: "Keep the fire alive, don't let sleep win." The settlers who built cabins in these frozen lands learned that silence could be louder than thunder. The wind moaned like ghosts of those who didn't make it through last winter. Wolves howled from beyond the hills, their cries fading into the icy wind like memories of lost friends. Every morning, another settler was found stiff and still beside an empty stove, his last log burned to ash. But still, people stayed. They stayed because they believed this land, this frozen, brutal land, would one day bloom with life. The snow buried everything but hope, and that hope, fragile as a candle in the storm, kept them breathing through nights that could freeze the soul itself. In the middle of nowhere, Jake spotted a faint orange glow, a cabin maybe. His horse stumbled through the snow, exhausted. He whispered softly, "Just a little further, boy." The animal's breath steamed in the darkness like smoke from a dying fire. What Jake didn't know was that the people inside that cabin, a frontier family and a wounded Lakota traveler, were also clinging to the last scraps of warmth. The storm was about to bind their fates together in ways that would be remembered long after the snow melted. The orange glow grew brighter as Jake pushed through the wall of snow. Each step was a fight, his boots sinking deep, his body trembling beneath layers of frozen leather. The storm roared like a living beast, gnawing at his strength, tearing the world into white fragments. Then, through the howling dark, a shape appeared. A cabin, low and hunched under a thick coat of snow. Smoke trickled from its chimney, twisting weakly into the night sky. He wasn't sure if it was real or a trick of his frozen mind. But hope, even when faint, can burn hotter than any fire. Jake stumbled to the door and pounded 3 times. Silence. Then the sound of footsteps inside, cautious, hesitant. The door creaked open just wide enough for a pair of eyes to appear. A woman's voice broke the storm. "Who's there?" "A traveler," Jake gasped, "lost in the wind." The door opened wider. Warm air spilled out, carrying the scent of wood smoke and boiled beans. Inside stood a small family, a man with weathered hands, his wife with tired eyes, and a boy no older than 10 clutching a ragged blanket. In the corner, near the fire, lay another figure, a Lakota man, wrapped in hides, his breath shallow, his arm bound with torn cloth. The father's voice was steady but guarded. "Come in, stranger. You won't last long out there." Jake stepped inside, the warmth striking him like sunlight after eternity. His knees almost gave way. The woman guided him toward the hearth, where a pot simmered slowly. She said softly, "You can thaw here. We don't have much, but it's warmer than death." The wind screamed outside as the door closed, rattling the wooden walls. The storm had found its voice again, wrapping the cabin in an unbroken howl. Jake looked at the Lakota man by the fire. The stranger's eyes opened just slightly, calm but burning with fever. 2 men from different worlds trapped under the same roof by nature's wrath. "He came yesterday," the woman whispered. "We found him by the creek, half buried in snow. He hasn't spoken since." The father poured a bit of whiskey into a tin cup and handed it to Jake. "Drink," he said. "Out here, whiskey's the closest thing we got to medicine." The liquid burned down his throat, spreading warmth like firelight through his chest. For the first time in days, Jake could feel his fingers again. "Storm will last till morning, maybe longer, but the wind don't stay forever." Outside, the snow fell like silent ash. Inside, 3 souls and 1 wounded man shared the fragile peace between gusts. They didn't know it yet, but this night, this single night of frozen quiet, would tie their fates together more tightly than blood. For in the morning, not all of them would see the sun.
The night deepened Outside, the storm had no mercy left to spend. It clawed at the cabin walls, shrieking like something ancient that wanted to be remembered. Inside, the small room flickered in firelight, faces glowing, shadows trembling. The woman stirred the pot with slow hands, her eyes half on the flame, half on the wounded Lakota man who hadn't moved in hours. Jake sat near the window, watching flakes of snow slam against the glass and vanish. "You ever seen cold like this?" the boy asked, his voice almost a whisper. Jake shook his head. "Not this kind. This kind don't bite, it waits. It watches you fall asleep." The boy shivered and pressed closer to his mother. The father tossed another log into the fire. It hissed, spat, and then quieted. "We'll be fine till morning," he said, though his tone carried no conviction. In truth, the woodpile was nearly gone. Each breath they took made the cabin warmer, but the air thinner. Outside, the wind shifted. The sound changed, softer now, almost like waves. Jake rose and cracked the door open just enough to look. The world was white and still. No horizon, no sky, only snow. But beneath the stillness, something stirred, a distant rumble, the low groan of weight pressing down on the frozen earth. "Drifts moving," he murmured. "If the roof's not strong," the father understood before he finished. They braced the door with the table, pushed barrels against the back wall. The Lakota man's eyes opened then, just for a moment. He whispered something faint, the syllables ancient and heavy, a word that meant spirits of the north. The woman knelt beside him, wiping his brow with a piece of cloth. "Rest now," she whispered. "You're safe here." But even she didn't believe it. The wind roared again, louder, closer. Then came the sound, a cracking, deep and final. The roof above them sagged under the weight of snow. Jake lunged forward, pulling the boy clear just as a beam gave way. Sparks flew from the fire, scattering like tiny stars across the floor. The room filled with smoke, ash, and fear. "Get to the corner!" the father shouted. They huddled near the far wall, coughing, the cold rushing in through the splintered ceiling. The Lakota man tried to rise but fell back, his body trembling. Jake grabbed a blanket, throwing it over the family. The storm howled through the broken roof, sweeping embers into the dark. Then, silence. For a long time, only the sound of breath remained, slow and unsure. The fire had died, leaving nothing but faint red coals buried under ash. Jake stared at them, that tiny heartbeat of warmth still alive. He took the last piece of wood from the corner and fed it gently into the coals. A weak flame flickered up, enough to light the boy's eyes again. The woman whispered a prayer in the dim glow. The Lakota man's voice joined hers, soft and rhythmic, a chant that sounded like wind turning to song. Outside, dawn began to bleed into the horizon, pale, fragile, the color of forgiveness. The storm had ended, but the West, that endless land of silence and survival, was never finished testing those who called it home. When the morning light crept through the cracks of the cabin, it carried no warmth. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so complete that even the wind seemed exhausted.
Snow piled high against the door, the world outside buried beneath a white, endless hush. Inside, the Thompson family began to stir. A mother, a father, and 5 children, wrapped together beneath layers of buffalo hide and wool. Their breath rose in soft clouds, hanging in the air like pale ghosts. The cabin measured barely 3 by 4 meters, a box of frozen wood and fading dreams. The father, Samuel Thompson, rubbed his hands together and exhaled into them, watching the mist fade before his eyes. He whispered to his wife, "Still alive." She nodded faintly, her lips cracked, her eyes heavy from another sleepless night. The youngest, little Mary, had slept pressed against her mother's chest, her tiny hands tucked beneath the blanket for warmth. The sound of her breathing, slow, steady, was the only proof that hope still lingered. Outside, the cold pressed against the walls, searching for weakness. The logs creaked as if groaning under its touch. Samuel took a handful of dry moss and began pushing it into the cracks between the boards, green veins against gray wood. "Ruth," he murmured, "pass me the hide." She handed him a strip of buffalo leather, stiff with frost. Together, they patched the door where the wind slipped through. It was their daily ritual, a quiet battle fought in silence. Each movement was deliberate, not just survival, but defiance. The children huddled together near the hearth, though the fire had long gone out. The smoke from the night before still clung to the air, heavy with the damp scent of wet wood. Ruth stirred a pot filled with a thin paste of cornmeal, their breakfast, their lunch, their dinner. She looked at the pale liquid and whispered, 4 months, the same taste. Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder. As long as it keeps us breathing. He didn't add that the stores were nearly empty, or that the last sack of meal would be gone within a week. Outside, the sun hung low, pale and distant, more decoration than warmth. From somewhere beyond the hills came the faint cry of a wolf, lonely, tired, haunting. The children froze for a moment, then leaned closer to their mother. She smiled weakly, brushing their hair with trembling fingers. "It's just the wind," though she knew it wasn't. The cabin was both a shelter and a prison. Its walls held in the breath of 7 souls, each night closer to the edge of endurance. And yet, amid that fragile stillness, something beautiful persisted. The rhythm of shared life, the sound of the baby's sigh, the soft clink of a spoon in the pot, the creak of the roof when the wind shifted. These were their hymns, the music of survival. Later that night, as the temperature dropped again, Ruth pressed her children closer. She whispered an old lullaby her mother used to sing in Missouri, her voice trembling like candlelight. "Sleep, little one, the stars will keep you warm." But even as she sang, she watched the door and the snow beyond it, knowing that each night the cold came back, patient as death, waiting for someone too tired to wake. As days turned into weeks, the world outside remained locked in white. The Thompson cabin stood half buried in snow, its chimney breathing a thin wisp of smoke into the frozen sky. Inside, the family had stopped counting time. There were no calendars here, no clocks, only the rhythm of hunger, the cycle of fire and frost. Ruth woke first each morning, long before the gray light touched the window. She would sit by the hearth, rubbing her hands, listening to the faint crackle of embers fighting their last battle. Every morning the same thought passed through her mind. Will today be the day we run out? The cornmeal jar was almost empty now. What was left barely covered the bottom, a golden dust they treated like treasure. Each meal was measured, stirred with trembling hands, and shared with quiet reverence. The children had stopped complaining weeks ago. Hunger had dulled even their words. Samuel tried to hunt, but the prairie had gone still. No rabbits, no birds, only the distant tracks of wolves. Sometimes he would return at dusk with nothing but frost in his beard, shaking his head. "Nothing out there," he'd whisper. "Nothing but snow and silence." At night, the wind carried strange sounds, cracking trees, howling distances, whispers of something alive but unseen. The cabin would shudder, and the children would pull closer to their mother, hiding beneath the buffalo hides. The smell of smoke and damp moss clung to everything: their clothes, their hair, their dreams. To stay warm, they sealed every crack with mud and straw. Ruth hung quilts across the doorway, creating a small cocoon where their body heat lingered. When that wasn't enough, they slept side by side, a tangle of limbs and blankets, breathing each other's warmth like a prayer. In those dark hours, Ruth would think of her own childhood, of green summers in Missouri, of her mother's garden, and the sound of crickets in the night. Those memories felt like stories from another life. Now her hands were cracked, her lips pale, her voice reduced to whispers. Still, she sang. She sang to keep the silence away. One night as the storm returned, Samuel opened an old trunk near the bed. Inside were two things he had kept hidden: his wedding Bible and a single letter from a friend back east, dated 2 years ago. The paper was stiff and yellowed, but he read it again as if the words might warm him. Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote this week about the great winter. Said the trains stopped. People burned furniture to keep alive. But they endured. Samuel folded the letter gently. He whispered, "If they could endure,
so can we." Ruth heard him, though she didn't answer. The fire was dying again. She reached for the last handful of twigs and fed them in. The flames rose briefly, painting her face in soft orange light. Her eyes glistened, not from tears, but from reflection, the shimmer of someone who refused to let go. In that fragile glow, the family huddled closer, the youngest child pressing her cheek to her mother's chest, hearing the faint heartbeat that meant home. The world outside might have forgotten them, but inside that cabin, the will to live still burned. Small, flickering, but alive. That night, the wind returned, quieter, colder, more patient. It slid through the seams of the world like an invisible hand, testing every wall, every soul. Inside the Thompson cabin, the last of the fire flickered, its glow no brighter than a dying star. The room was a hushed cocoon of breath and whisper. The children slept in a tangle of blankets, their cheeks pale, their small chests rising with shallow rhythm. Samuel sat awake, his back against the log wall, the rifle across his knees. He wasn't guarding against wolves, he was guarding against despair. In that kind of silence, even thoughts could freeze. Ruth lay beside the baby, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling. The smell of damp ash clung to her hair. Her mind drifted to the sound of rain, real rain, tapping against the roof of her old home when winters still had mercy. Now only snow fell, thick and endless. She turned her head, listening to her husband's breathing, slow, steady, human. She whispered softly, "We'll make it, Sam." He didn't answer, but his hand reached out in the dark and found hers. Outside, the world groaned. Somewhere a tree cracked, its frozen trunk splitting with a deep sigh. Then silence again, the kind that felt almost holy. Around midnight, little Mary stirred. Her hand reached out from beneath the hide, cold and small. Ruth tucked it back under the blanket, humming a tune that wasn't really a song, more a sound, a rhythm, a reminder that love still existed, even here. The tune carried through the air, fragile and warm. Samuel closed his eyes and listened. It reminded him of church bells far away, of a summer field, of a promise. Hours passed. The cabin grew darker, heavier. The fire had burned down to embers, glowing faintly red beneath a thin film of ash. Samuel rose quietly, broke apart a wooden chair, and fed it to the coals. The flames came back to life, reluctant but alive. He stared into the light and saw their reflection, the outlines of his family, curled together, surviving. The baby's breath was slow and soft. The oldest boy, Thomas, murmured something in his sleep, the name of a horse they had lost last spring. Ruth smiled faintly. Even in dreams, they were still trying to hold on to what was gone. Near dawn, Samuel opened the door. The hinges screamed softly, and a rush of white air poured in. He stepped out into a world remade. Snow as far as he could see
smooth as glass, shining under the faint light of the moon. The cold bit his skin, but the silence was beautiful. Behind him, the cabin glowed dimly, a fragile heart beating in the frozen wilderness. He whispered into the open air, "Hold on just a little longer." When he returned, Ruth was awake, watching the horizon through the crack in the boards. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Yes," he answered, "and cruel." They sat together until the first light of morning slipped through the frost, painting their faces gold. That light didn't bring warmth, not yet, but it brought something else, a promise. History would later record the winter of 1875 as one of the worst on the frontier, but in homes like the Thompsons, no record could capture the real story. The sound of breath in the dark, the strength found in silence, the quiet victories no one would ever write down.
The prairie had been calm that morning, too calm. The kind of stillness that made old cowboys uneasy. The sky was pale, like washed bone, and the air carried a faint taste of iron. Jake Morrison tightened the strap of his coat and squinted at the horizon. He'd been driving cattle for 3 days across the open plains of Wyoming, the herd stretching like a dark river against the snow-dusted ground. The men joked and smoked, their laughter echoing through the crisp air, unaware that the land itself was holding its breath. It started with a sound, a low hum, like distant thunder, but heavier, closer. The horses snorted and stamped, ears twitching toward the north. Then the light changed. The sun dimmed, its circle swallowed by a gray curtain rolling fast across the sky. "Storm!" someone muttered. Jake didn't need to look twice. The horizon had vanished. A wall of white was racing toward them, faster than any man could ride. "Move!" he shouted. "Get the herd turned! Head for the ridge!" But the words were torn away by wind. Within minutes, the world disappeared. Snow fell, not in flakes, but in sheets, driven sideways by the gale. It bit through wool and skin alike. The cattle bawled, scattering into the storm, their silhouettes swallowed one by one. Jake could see maybe 10 feet ahead, the shape of his horse, the shadow of another rider, and then nothing. The blizzard hit with the sound like the sky breaking open. Wind screamed through the gaps between the earth and heaven, and every breath turned to ice before it could leave his lungs. The herd was gone. The men were ghosts in white. "Tom? Sam? Anyone?" Jake's voice vanished in the howl. He pulled the reins hard and leaned low, trusting the horse more than his eyes. The animal fought the snow, muscles trembling beneath the saddle. Time lost all meaning. Day and night merged into one long storm. The only thing that mattered was warmth and keeping the fire inside from going out. Hours later, Jake stumbled upon a low ridge, the faint outline of a shack half buried in snow. It was the bunkhouse, the Cowboys shelter they'd built months ago. He kicked at the frozen door and shouted. It opened just enough for him to slip inside. The room was dark, smoky, alive with the smell of wet leather and sweat. 3 men huddled around a tiny fire, their faces red and cracked, steam rising from their clothes. "You made it," one said hoarsely. "Barely," Jake replied, shaking snow from his hat. "Where's Tom?"
Silence. Then someone pointed toward the corner. Tom Frostbite Miller sat with his hands wrapped in cloth, staring at nothing. Jake crouched beside him. "You lost them?" Tom nodded slowly. "3 fingers. Frost got 'em before the fire did." He smiled weakly, the kind of smile that came from pain too deep to name. The storm screamed outside, but inside, the men's silence was louder. They'd seen death before in shootouts, stampedes, fever, but this kind of death was different. It was quiet, patient, beautiful in a way that made you want to cry. That night they spread out their horse blankets near the fire, layering them thick. The bunkhouse creaked under the weight of wind and ice. Someone prayed, someone cursed. Jake sat awake, staring into the fire, watching it dance like a living thing. It reminded him of home, of his mother's lantern on nights just like this, when the world felt too big and too cold. "Don't let it die," he whispered. And so they took turns through the night, feeding the flames, guarding that one small light in the storm.
The night deepened, and the wind refused to rest. The walls of the bunkhouse shook as if the whole prairie were breathing against them. The fire sputtered, each spark a tiny rebellion against the cold. Jake knew it couldn't last. They had only a few logs left, wet, heavy, and half frozen. The horses outside cried into the storm, hooves pounding, terrified. He stood, grabbed his hat, and pulled his coat tighter. "We can't let them die," he said. Sam looked up from the fire, his face hollow in the flickering light. "You'll freeze out there." Jake smiled faintly. "Then I'll freeze with them." He pushed through the door, the storm instantly devouring him. Snow slashed at his face, the cold like needles in his skin. The world was a blur, only sound and motion. He found the horses half buried near the corral, their backs dusted with ice, their eyes wide and wild. "Easy, girl," he whispered, stroking one's neck, his breath fogging in the air. The animal trembled but didn't move. He began digging with his gloved hands, clearing the snow around their legs, whispering soft curses between breaths. The snow bit through his gloves, through his fingers, until he couldn't feel where skin ended and ice began. But he kept working. The storm roared, testing him. It was no longer man against nature. It was man inside nature's fury, learning its rhythm, its silence. After what felt like hours, Jake managed to carve a hollow in the drift, a low trench against the hill, lined with snow walls that blocked the wind. He guided 2 horses into it, pressing his body close to theirs, feeling the heat of life radiate from their sides. He gathered the rest of the men, shouting through the wind, "Get down here! Bring what you can!" One by one, shadows moved through the storm, dragging blankets, saddles, even pieces of the bunkhouse door. They packed into the hollow, half men, half ghosts, faces pale and rimmed with frost. The horses snorted steam, their bodies quivering but steady. The cowboys wrapped themselves in horse blankets, curling against the animals for warmth. It was a strange comfort, the pulse of life beneath layers of hair and hide, the steady breath of a creature that had carried them across the frontier. Jake pressed his face against the horse's shoulder. "You save me, I save you. Fair trade." The blizzard raged on. The snow piled higher, sealing them in. Inside that cocoon of ice and breath, the world shrank to sound, the hiss of wind,
the crackle of a small fire, and the slow rhythm of hearts beating together. No one spoke, no one needed to. Time passed in strange ways. Minutes felt like years. Jake drifted in and out of sleep, his dreams filled with voices, warm sunlight, the laughter of men long dead. Then a shout. Sam's voice. "Fire's out!" Jake jerked awake, fumbling for his flint. His hands barely obeyed him, stiff as wood. He struck again and again until a spark caught. The flame grew, trembling, feeding on scraps of saddle leather and bits of cloth. The light spread, soft gold against the white walls of snow. They huddled closer, eyes half closed as if worshiping it. In that moment, it wasn't just fire, it was faith. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, 7 cowboys and 2 horses survived through the night, not by strength, but by surrender, by becoming part of the storm instead of fighting it. And somewhere in that frozen silence, life whispered its oldest lesson. Sometimes, to live, you must stop resisting the cold and learn to breathe within it.
When morning finally came, it didn't look like morning at all. The storm had swallowed the sun. Everything was white. The sky, the earth, the horizon, all melted into one endless silence. The bunkhouse was gone, buried under drifts taller than a man. For a long moment, Jake thought he'd gone blind. Then the wind shifted, and light broke through the clouds like a blade. It touched the snow, and suddenly the whole prairie glittered like glass. He could hear nothing but his own heartbeat, slow, steady, real. The men began to stir, their bodies stiff, faces pale, eyes sunken but alive. They pushed away the blankets, the crusted frost breaking off their coats. Jake blinked hard, snowflakes melting on his lashes. Around them, the hollow they'd carved during the storm was now a white crater, walls smooth and shining like marble. 2 of the horses still stood, tails frozen stiff, their breath visible in short bursts. 1 horse had fallen in the night, its body now a curved mound of snow. Jake rested a gloved hand on its side, whispering something soft, something only the wind could carry away. Sam was the first to speak. "We're still here," he said, voice hoarse. "Still here," Jake echoed. The words didn't feel like victory, just acknowledgement. Survival wasn't triumph out here. It was debt. Every breath borrowed from the land, every heartbeat a gift returned at dawn. They began digging, cutting a path through the drifts toward what used to be the bunkhouse. The roof had collapsed under the weight, but the stove was still there, half buried in snow. Inside its black mouth, ashes glowed faintly, the last ember from the night before. Jake knelt, cupped his hands around it, and blew gently. A thread of smoke rose, the ember brightened. Behind him, Tom Frostbite Miller sat against a snowbank, staring at his bandaged hands. He said nothing. His breath fogged the air in front of him, white on white. Jake walked over and crouched beside him. "Still hurts?" Tom nodded once. "Feels like fire and ice at the same time." Jake smiled faintly. "That means you're alive." Tom looked up then, eyes clear for the first time in days. "Alive," he repeated, tasting the word like it was new. They stayed there until noon, waiting for the storm to pass completely. The world was so quiet it felt sacred. The snow shimmered under the weak sun, and the wind whispered across the plains, gentle now, almost tender. The men didn't talk much. There was nothing to say. They had seen something beyond words, a place between living and frozen eternity. In that white tomb of silence, they had been buried and somehow reborn. As they packed their saddles and mounted the remaining horses, Jake turned once more to look at the prairie. It was endless, shining, cruel, and beautiful. He thought of all those who hadn't made it through nights like this, names lost to snow and time. He whispered a quiet promise to them, "We'll remember." Then, with a click of his tongue, he led the horses west, their hooves leaving the first dark marks on the untouched snow. Behind them, the wind erased their tracks within minutes, as if the prairie itself wanted to keep the secret of their survival.
Long before settlers built their wooden habits, the Lakota people had already learned how to make warmth out of wind and wisdom. Their homes stood across the frozen plains like low brown hills, silent, breathing smoke. From a distance, a camp of teepees looked like a small constellation on the earth, flickers of orange firelight beneath the endless blue-black sky. When Jake Morrison first saw it, he thought he was dreaming. The storm had passed, his strength nearly gone, when he spotted the glow through the trees. As he approached, the air changed. The wind softened, and the smell of burning sage and buffalo fat drifted toward him. Ancient, earthy, alive. He guided his horse closer and stopped at the edge of the Lakota camp. Dozens of teepees stood in a circle, snow banked around their bases like protective hands. Smoke trailed from the tops, curling gently upward. It was quiet, but not empty. He could hear laughter, the rhythmic beat of a drum, and something deeper beneath it all, life, steady and calm. A young Lakota boy approached, wrapped in fur, his eyes bright against the white world. "You are cold," he said simply. Jake nodded. The boy pointed toward a large teepee in the center. "Go there. Fire is waiting." Inside, the air was thick with warmth. Not the sharp heat of a campfire, but something gentler, like the breath of many hearts. The teepee was built from 3 layers of buffalo hide, stretched tight over a frame of poles angled toward the sky. Between the hides was a space of trapped air, invisible insulation that made the interior nearly 20 degrees warmer than outside. Around the central fire pit sat 6 people, elders, children, mothers, fathers, a whole family in one glowing circle. They moved slowly, with quiet grace, tending the fire, stirring soup, mending clothes. Jake stood at the entrance, unsure. An elder woman looked up and smiled. "Sit. The wind is our brother, but tonight
he stays outside." He sat beside the fire, the flames licked upward, the light flickering against faces lined with wisdom. A pot of soup hung above the coals, the smell rich and comforting. Bone broth, herbs, bits of pemmican melted into liquid gold. The elder woman handed him a wooden bowl. "Eat," she said. "You cannot fight the cold on an empty spirit." He tasted it, warmth spreading through him like sunrise. "This will save you. Our people live because we share." Outside, the wind moaned against the hides, but the sound was distant, softened. The teepee breathed, each gust of wind feeding the fire instead of fighting it. The smoke escaped from the flap at the top, drawn upward by the heat. It was simple science, Jake realized, but it was also art. These people had built not walls, but balance. In their world, warmth was not owned, it was shared. Later that night, he watched as the families gathered around the largest teepee at the center of camp. Nearly 30 people sat together, their bodies close, their voices low. They sang softly, drums echoing like heartbeats. The children laughed, rolling in furs, while the elders told stories of winters past. The firelight painted the hides in gold and shadow. Jake listened, his mind drifting between wake and dream. Here, in this circle of strangers, he felt safer than he ever had in any cabin of wood and nails.
That night, the fire in the Lakota camp breathed like a living thing. Every teepee shimmered with soft orange light, its surface rippling under the rhythm of the wind. Jake sat cross-legged near the central fire, watching the smoke curl upward through the vent above, a perfect column, smooth and constant. He realized it wasn't chance. The Lakota built their teepees to breathe. The air that slipped through the base fed the fire. The rising heat pulled fresh air inside. A balance, nature's own design turned into shelter. "The wind feeds, the fire gives," said the elder sitting across from him. His name was Wikasa, a man with silver braids and eyes like still water. "If one tries to control the other, both die. We build homes the way we live, in balance." Jake nodded slowly. He had spent years in wooden cabins that suffocated their fires or leaked cold through every wall. Here, in a circle of hides and air, it was warmer than any bunkhouse he'd known. Wikasa smiled at his wonder. "The white man builds walls to keep nature out," he said, poking the coals with a stick. "We build them to keep nature in." A woman ladled soup into bowls, passing them to the circle. It smelled rich, bone broth thickened with dried meat, berries, and something sweet he couldn't name. "Pemmican," Wikasa explained, "our food for winter. We dry the buffalo meat in the sun, mix it with fat and fruit. One handful can keep a man alive a whole day." Jake tasted it, dense, salty, alive with flavor. "We never eat alone," the elder added. "A fire burns longer when many sit beside it." Outside, The storm's breath still swept across the plains, but the camp glowed steady. Children's laughter rose and fell like sparks. Near the edge of the circle, a group of young men began to drum, slow at first, then faster, their voices rising in a chant that carried through the snow. It wasn't a song of worship or fear, but one of gratitude. To the fire, to the buffalo, to the unseen spirits that carried warmth from one heart to another. "They dance to stay warm?" Jake asked. Wakasa chuckled softly. "They dance to remember they are alive." He looked around the circle, families pressed close, faces illuminated by flame. Each pair of hands, each breath, seemed part of something larger, a single organism pulsing in rhythm with the night. The heat was no longer just physical, it was human, spiritual. The Lakota didn't fight the cold, they embraced it, turning hardship into communion. Jake felt his body relax for the first time in weeks. His shoulders loosened, his breath matched the drum. The fear that had clung to him since the blizzard began to melt away. He felt it, that wordless wisdom that had guided these people for centuries. Warmth was not found in walls, but in circles. Later, Wakasa placed a handful of herbs into the fire. The flames turned blue, then gold, then white. The smoke rose, carrying the scent of sage, cedar, and something ancient. He spoke softly, almost to the fire itself. "This flame is a spirit. Treat it as you treat a friend. Feed it, speak to it, thank it. It listens." Jake watched, transfixed, as the others bowed their heads. He did the same, though he didn't yet understand why. But in that stillness, something inside him shifted. A memory, a realization. Maybe he thought surviving the frontier wasn't about fighting it. Maybe it was about learning to live with it, breathe with it, the way the Lakota did. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the fire glowed brighter. Not from the wood it burned, but from the souls gathered around it. The morning came quietly, wrapped in fog and snow. Jake stood outside the teepee, watching smoke drift into the pale sky. The world was white again, but this time it didn't feel cruel. It felt sacred, like a blanket drawn over something precious. The Lakota camp moved slowly, each person with a rhythm born of patience. The children fetched snow to melt for water. The women stirred the pot above the fire. Men tended to the horses, brushing frost from their backs. It was life, simple, complete, alive. From the edge of the camp, Jake saw a figure stumbling through the snow. Small, thin, clutching a bundle. He ran forward. It was a woman, her face raw from wind, lips cracked, eyes hollow. In her arms, a child barely moving. Behind her, 2 boys followed, dragging a sled of wood. "Help," she whispered, voice breaking. Jake caught her before she fell. "Easy, you're safe now." He looked back toward the camp.
"They're settlers," he said breathlessly to Wichasa. "A family." The elder stepped forward without hesitation. "Bring them in." Within minutes, the Lakota moved like a single heartbeat. The teepee doors opened. Blankets appeared. Someone fed the fire. Someone boiled water. The woman, Mrs. Thompson, as Jake later learned, lay beside her children, their faces pressed close to the flames. The youngest, a girl no older than 5, whimpered once before falling asleep in her mother's arms. The smell of sage filled the air again, soft and clean. They came from the east, Jake explained quietly. Their cabin collapsed in the storm. No food left. Wichasa nodded. "Then they are our guests." He turned to the others and spoke in Lakota. Instantly, bowls of soup were passed, furs laid out, hands extended. No one asked if they were strangers. No one asked what they could give in return. Warmth in this place wasn't a bargain. It was a law. Hours passed. The storm outside eased into silence. Inside, the teepee glowed golden. Mrs. Thompson stirred, eyes heavy but grateful. "Why are they helping us?" she whispered. Jake glanced at Wichasa, who sat nearby, humming an old song under his breath. "Because they understand the cold," Jake said softly, "and they never forget what it can take away." Wichasa looked up then, meeting her gaze. "The fire is not ours," he said slowly. "It belongs to all who need it." He pointed toward the flame. "It does not ask your name before it warms you." That night, for the first time in weeks, the Thompson family ate a full meal: buffalo stew, pemmican, and bone soup. The children laughed weakly, chasing each other around the fire. One of the Lakota women placed a small feather in the little girl's hair. "For protection," she said, "so the wind will know you." Jake watched, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. Not relief, but belonging. The circle around the fire had grown larger, its warmth reaching farther than the hides could contain. Two worlds, once divided by fear and ignorance, now breathed together in the same rhythm. Later, when the wind quieted completely, Wichasa stepped outside and looked up at the stars. Jake joined him. "Your people," Jake said, "you save lives without weapons." The elder smiled faintly. "Our weapons are older: fire, patience, sharing." He paused, then added, "The white man will build big towns someday, with walls and glass. But if he forgets this," he tapped his chest, "then no house will ever be warm." The snow glowed faintly under the moonlight. From within the teepees came the sound of laughter, the soft murmur of sleep, the crackle of fire still alive. Jake closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of smoke and life. For the first time, he understood what warmth truly meant. Not the fire that burns wood, but the one that burns quietly between people.
Winter did not care who you were. It did not care for courage or faith or the bright promises written in ink on land deeds. When the first snow fell on the Great Plains, it erased the lines between the living and the hopeful, leaving only those strong enough or lucky enough to see spring again. Historians would later say that 30 to 40% of settlers never survived their first winter. But numbers could never capture the sound, the quiet of doors frozen shut, the cries of children muffled by snow, the silence that followed. Jake Morrison had heard stories before of the Donner Party, trapped in the Sierra Nevada in 1846. 87 men, women, and children set out for California, chasing the same dream as everyone else: land, gold, freedom. Only 48 survived. When rescuers arrived, they found the rest buried under snow, and worse, found the truth that kept the survivors alive. They had eaten what the land would not give. But this winter wasn't just about one story. Across the frontier, thousands of small homesteads lay stranded beneath drifts taller than rooftops. Mail stopped coming. Roads disappeared. In some towns, entire families froze where they slept, their bodies found months later still wrapped in blankets. In others, starvation crept in quietly, not as drama, but as routine. Meals shrank, then stopped. The world narrowed to the sound of the wind scratching at the shutters and the heartbeat in one's own chest. One such place was a nameless settlement west of Nebraska. By January, snow had sealed every path. The last wagon had come through weeks before. Inside a small cabin, a woman named Sarah Mitchell sat by the dim glow of a dying fire, writing what she knew would be her final letter. "My dearest sister," she began, "if this reaches you, then know that we tried." Her ink froze between lines. She warmed the pen above the flame, continued with trembling hands. "The corn is gone, the oxen dead. We found nothing in the traps for days. John says the snow is too deep for the men to ride. I can no longer feel my feet. But the children still laugh when I tell them spring is near." She paused, looking toward the window, a sheet of frost reflecting her face back at her, pale and soft, already half a ghost. "Tell Father I remember the song he sang when we left," she wrote. "It still keeps me warm." She folded the page and pressed it beneath a cracked Bible. Outside, the wind moaned like a voice from heaven. When rescuers arrived in April, they found her still sitting there, hands clasped in her lap, the letter preserved beside her. Across the plains, there were hundreds of Sarahs, hundreds of cabins swallowed by snow, hundreds of stories untold. Dr. Henry Lowell, a physician who kept a diary through that winter, wrote of 47 deaths in a single small town, not from war or plague, but from the slow, inevitable quiet of cold. It is not a violent death, it is gentle, and that is what makes it cruel.
they fall asleep. The snow buried everything: fences, wagons, footprints, graves. When spring came, the thaw revealed strange shapes in the fields, outlines of towns that would never breathe again. People called them ghost towns, but they were not haunted by spirits. They were haunted by memory, by the silence of those who had once believed so fiercely that they could conquer nature. Jake rode through one of those towns months later. The signs still hung from the stores, letters faded, doors creaking in the wind. He dismounted, walked among the ruins, and for the first time removed his hat. "They didn't lose," he whispered to himself. "They just didn't finish."
When the thaw came, the snow did not melt all at once. It retreated slowly, as if reluctant to reveal what it had taken. Beneath it, the land exhaled stories, letters, journals, keepsakes sealed in frost. Men who came later, soldiers, traders, wanderers, sometimes found them by accident. A trunk half buried near a fallen chimney, a folded page tucked in a tin cup. The handwriting faded, but the words still burned. One such letter was found near the remains of a small cabin north of Cheyenne. The snow had crushed the roof long ago, but beneath it, someone had wrapped paper in oilcloth to keep it dry. It was dated January 3rd, 1877, signed S. Peterson. The letter read simply, "If the Lord spares our souls, tell them we loved this place." The writer, Samuel Peterson, had come west with his wife and 2 daughters. When spring thawed their land, rescuers found them together, not scattered, but sitting close by the hearth, as if still waiting for morning. A single wooden cross now marks the spot. The wind still hums around it like a hymn. In another place, far to the east, Dr. Henry Lowell's journal was recovered. His handwriting was small and careful, each line a battle against trembling fingers. "Day 94, he wrote. "The thermometer reads 20 below. I have recorded 47 deaths since December. Most of the bodies remain in their homes, frozen as if asleep. I no longer remove my gloves to write." A few pages later, his tone changed. "Tonight, I sat with the Miller boy. He asked if it would hurt. I told him no, that it would feel like sleeping. He smiled, said he was tired of being cold." The final entry came a week later. "The firewood is gone. I can hear the wind through the cracks. I will rest now." The last line was written in pencil. The ink had frozen solid. Some of these words were later published in frontier newspapers. Others never left the drawers of small museums, hidden from tourists who preferred stories of gold and glory. But for those who read them, the letters were not morbid relics. They were confessions, proof that even in the loneliest corners of the world, people still tried to reach out, to speak, to be remembered. Jake Morrison read one such letter years later in a trading post. A copy of Sarah Mitchell's final note had been reprinted and hung near the stove. He stood there for a long time, tracing each line with his eyes. The shopkeeper noticed. "Hard reading, isn't it?" Jake nodded. "Feels like she's still talking," he murmured. The man smiled sadly. "Maybe she is." That night, Jake camped near the edge of the prairie, the same wind brushing his tent that had once howled through Sarah's cabin. He lit a small fire, the flames fluttering like memory. For a while, he imagined voices carried on the wind, fragments of prayers, laughter, the soft sound of pens scratching paper. He thought of all those who had written into the silence, hoping someone, someday, would read their words. In that thought, he found a strange peace. The frontier had taken their bodies, but their voices, quiet, steady, human, had survived the cold. By late spring, the prairie had turned from white to gold. Grass pushed through the melting snow, soft and green, as if the earth itself was breathing again. But in the far reaches of the plains, where the wind still carried whispers of frost, the scars of winter remained. Wooden fences warped and split, wells filled with ice, and in the hollow shells of forgotten houses, silence lingered, heavy, sacred, unbroken. The newspapers called them ghost towns, but Jake Morrison knew better. He had ridden through enough of them to understand that they weren't haunted by spirits. They were haunted by memory, the faint echo of laughter, the shape of footprints leading nowhere, the smell of smoke that still clung to cracked brick chimneys. Sometimes, if you stood still long enough, you could almost hear it, the hum of a life once ordinary, once full. One of those towns was Clearwater. Once a promising settlement of 30 families, it now lay scattered across the plains like the bones of a shipwreck. Jake rode through its main street one evening, the sun sinking low behind the hills. The saloon doors hung crooked, swaying in the breeze. A single chair sat overturned in the middle of the road, half buried in dust. He dismounted, his boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. Inside the general store, shelves still held cans and rusted tools. A child's toy, a wooden horse, lay near the counter. Its paint had faded, but one wheel still turned. He picked it up, turning it gently in his hand. It was so small, so human. Outside, the wind swept through the empty street, whistling low, carrying a sound that could almost have been a voice. "We were here," it seemed to say. "We tried." Jake stepped back into the cold air. The sky above burned orange and purple, the last light of day catching on the snow that still clung to rooftops. He looked around at the houses, the barns, the ghostly outlines of dreams that had once been alive. And for a moment, he removed his hat again, as he had done before, and bowed his head, not out of sorrow,
but respect. These people had not failed. They had simply reached the edge of what the human heart could endure. As night fell, he built a fire outside the remains of the old church. The steeple was gone, but the bell still hung, cracked, silent. He sat near the flame, listening to the wind move through the empty windows. The sound was almost like music. He thought about the names he'd heard, the letters he'd read. Sarah Mitchell, Samuel Peterson, Dr. Lowell, and all the others whose names had been forgotten, but whose warmth had not. Maybe, he whispered, that's what ghosts really are. Memories that refuse to freeze. The fire burned low. Snow began to fall again, slow and soft. Each flake melted the moment it touched the ground, as if the earth at last was ready to let go. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its cry echoing across miles of open land. Jake looked up at the stars, countless, cold, eternal, and smiled. The frontier, for all its cruelty, had kept its promise. It had tested the living, claimed the dead, and written their stories into the wind. And now, beneath that endless sky, their voices would never be lost again.
By the time the next winter arrived, the settlers had changed, not just in body, but in spirit. They had stopped fighting the prairie and started listening to it. The land had become both teacher and shelter. Where wooden cabins once stood and froze, new homes rose from the very soil itself. Sod houses, the earth homes of the frontier. They were not beautiful by the standards of the East. From the outside, they looked like small hills, rough and uneven, their walls made of thick blocks of prairie turf cut from the ground with spades. But inside was warmth, the kind that wood could never give. A single sod wall, 2 feet thick, held heat like a living thing. In the coldest nights, when frost covered the windows of wooden cabins, the families who lived in the sod houses sat in shirt sleeves, their breath free from mist. The soil insulated them, a blanket drawn from the earth itself. Studies made decades later would show that a sod house stayed 20 degrees warmer than a log home in the same storm. But those who lived through it didn't need numbers. They could feel it in their fingers, in their lungs, in the laughter that no longer froze mid-air. Jake Morrison visited one such home that first autumn after the Great Blizzard. The Thompson family, the same who had once nearly perished, had built their new house halfway into a hill, walls of packed earth and a roof of grass. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, and from inside came the sound of children singing. He ducked through the low doorway. The room glowed amber in the firelight. The walls smelled faintly of clay and warmth. Mrs. Thompson smiled when she saw him. "Not much to look at," she said, "but it keeps us alive." Jake ran his hand along the wall, cool, solid, humming with quiet life. "Feels like the earth's got a heartbeat," he said. "Maybe it does," she replied softly.
It's been keeping us warm all season." In the back corner, shelves carved into the wall held jars of food: beans, cornmeal, salted pork. A small trap door in the floor led to a root cellar dug deep into the ground, where potatoes, onions, and apples lay stacked in straw. The air down there was cold, but never freezing, the perfect balance. "We learned from the land," Mrs. Thompson said, "and from the Lakota." She lifted a pot from the stove, steam curling like ribbons in the air. "They told us the earth remembers how to care for those who listen." Jake smiled, remembering the Lakota camp, the breathing fire, the shared warmth. The prairie, he thought, had a strange way of teaching. First it tested you, then it embraced you. Outside, the wind brushed softly over the hill, but the sod house stood still, unmoved, unbothered. It had no sharp edges for the storm to break. It was part of the land now, invisible but enduring. As night fell, Jake sat with the Thompsons by the fire, their laughter echoing off the earthen walls. The children drew pictures with charcoal on the floor: buffalo, horses, the rising sun. Somewhere between the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind, he realized something simple. Survival wasn't about conquering the wild. It was about returning to it, about remembering that every hand-built wall and every borrowed breath came from the same earth beneath their feet.
By the middle of that winter, the prairie had found a rhythm again. The endless whiteness no longer meant despair. It meant preparation. For when the snow came, so did the people. Neighbors who lived miles apart began to visit one another again, trudging through the drifts with horses and sleds, their faces wrapped in scarves, their eyes bright with purpose. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were building together. On a calm afternoon, Jake rode past a cluster of settlers gathered near a half-built barn. The air smelled of sawdust and frost. Men lifted heavy beams with bare hands wrapped in wool. Women stirred kettles of stew by the fire, passing bowls from one pair of chapped hands to another. Children chased one another through the snow, their laughter rising above the rhythm of hammers. It was what the settlers called a barn raising, a tradition that began back east but had become sacred here. When one family needed a barn, every hand in the valley came to help. Jake dismounted and joined in, gripping a rope to help pull the roof beam into place. The cold bit his fingers, but the warmth of shared effort was stronger. He glanced around, at the faces glowing with sweat and pride, at the simple joy of people who had learned that togetherness could be a kind of fire. When the barn was done, the families gathered inside. The air still smelled of pine and smoke. Someone played a fiddle, someone else passed whiskey. They danced, clumsy, tired, but alive. The sound of boots on the wooden floor echoed into the night. For one evening, the prairie wasn't wild or cruel. It was home. Later, Jake sat beside the fire outside with the Thompsons and a Lakota family who had come to trade. Between them lay a blanket covered in goods: salt, hides, tobacco, sewing needles, beads. No one spoke of money. Each item carried its own weight of value, shaped by need and trust. The Lakota man, whom Jake recognized from the blizzard, smiled faintly as he handed Mrs. Thompson a pouch of dried berries. In return, she offered a small loaf of bread, still warm. "We trade warmth for warmth," the Lakota said simply. "That's how winter is survived." Jake thought of those words long after the trade ended. In the flicker of the firelight, the faces of settlers and natives seemed softer, almost timeless, like a circle drawn against the wind. These gatherings were not grand. There were no speeches, no flags, but they were sacred all the same. Proof that out here, in a land too vast and too cold for any one soul, survival was no longer a solitary act. It was a promise, whispered from one hand to another. When Jake finally rose to leave, he looked back at the barn, its new roof catching the light of the moon, smoke curling from a small stove inside. The laughter had faded into quiet, but its warmth lingered. The prairie was still cold, but that night it felt less empty.
By the time spring crept back across the plains, the frontier no longer looked the same. The people weren't the same either. The cruelest winter in memory had stripped everything down to its essence, and what remained was something new. Not just survival, but understanding. Jake rode north one morning, following a trail where the snow had melted into streams. The air was soft again, carrying the smell of thawed earth and pine sap. In the distance, the land shimmered, the sawed houses like gentle humps along the horizon, the smoke of breakfast fires rising slow and blue. It no longer looked like a battlefield between man and nature. It looked like a conversation. Along the way, he passed the trading post, rebuilt after the storm, busier than ever. Inside, laughter echoed between barrels of salt pork and stacks of tanned hides. People were bartering stories now as much as goods. Tales of blizzards survived, of barns razed, of children born during the coldest nights. Each story was a kind of currency, proof that they had endured. Behind the counter stood the Lakota man, whose name Jake had finally learned, Tasca. His arm had healed, though a faint scar crossed it where frostbite once crept. "The wind's softer this year," Jake said. Tasca nodded. "The wind doesn't change," he answered. "We do." Outside, Jake paused beside his horse and looked out over the plains. The grass was already pushing through the thaw. A pair of hawks circled in the high air, calling to each other, a sound sharp but alive. "We do," Jake murmured, smiling. "We really do." That night,
he camped alone beneath a wide violet sky. His fire crackled low, sending small sparks into the wind. In his journal, he wrote, "The frontier is not the edge of the land, but the edge of ourselves. Out here, we learn where we end and where the world begins." He closed the book and lay back, watching stars emerge one by one. Around him, the prairie breathed, no longer hostile, just vast. He thought of all the people he'd met, the Thompsons in their earthen home, the Lakota sharing warmth, the laughter in the barn, the silence in Clearwater. Each had left a mark, like footprints in the snow that would melt but never truly fade. The fire dimmed, the night turned cold again, though not unkind. Jake pulled his blanket tighter and whispered a quiet thanks to the land, to the wind, to the winter that had nearly taken him, but had in the end given him back something greater. When dawn came, the horizon burned with gold. The frost glittered like diamonds across the grass. Jake saddled his horse and looked east, toward the rising sun, toward another day. The frontier, he thought, was not behind him. It was wherever people kept building, kept sharing, kept believing that warmth could be made from almost nothing. And as he rode on, the sound of the prairie, once wild and unforgiving, now followed like an old friend.
When winter reached its deepest hour, the nights stretched endlessly, 14, sometimes 16 hours of darkness that swallowed the world whole. There were no clocks, no street lamps, no hum of distant machines. Only the sound of wind against the cabin walls and the slow heartbeat of firelight flickering on the ceiling. In that long quiet, time began to dissolve. Families learned to measure the night not in hours, but in breaths, in the rise and fall of flames, in the creak of timber that expanded and sighed like a living thing. For those who lived on the frontier, night was both a trial and a teacher. It taught patience and the art of stillness. Jake Morrison remembered his first real frontier winter, when the dark felt alive. He would wake in the middle of the night to the sound of the wind slipping through cracks in the wood. The cold pressed against his skin like a hand searching for warmth. Sometimes he'd hear the distant cry of a coyote or the sharp crack of ice shifting in the river. These sounds no longer frightened him. They were company, proof that something else, somewhere, was still awake. Inside the cabin, the Thompsons had learned to live within the rhythm of long nights. They moved slower, spoke softer. The children slept in shifts, one curled against the mother, the other near the fire. Between them lay layers of buffalo hides, thick and heavy with the scent of smoke. Every few hours, someone would rise,
to feed the fire, to check the door, to listen. It wasn't fear that woke them, but habit, the instinct of people who had learned that sleep and survival were two sides of the same quiet. And yet there was peace. The nights were long, yes, but they carried a strange calm, a kind of silence that wrapped the mind like fur. Jake would sit by the window sometimes, watching snow fall in the dim orange glow. Each flake spun slowly, weightless, before landing on the frozen sill. He'd imagined them as souls, countless, cold but gentle, drifting, settling, resting. In the far distance, sometimes, light from another cabin would flicker faintly, a reminder that they weren't alone in the dark. He wondered how many families were awake, feeding their fires, whispering prayers before sleep. Maybe all of them were. Maybe that's what kept the plains alive through the winter. Not strength, not skill, but the simple promise that somewhere out there another flame was still burning.
As the nights deepened, sleep became something sacred, a ceremony performed not in haste but in reverence. Every family had its own ritual, its own way of surrendering to the dark. The Thompsons began with the fire, always the fire. Before anyone lay down, Mr. Thompson would kneel beside the hearth, stirring the coals with slow, practiced care. The flames would rise and dance, red and gold, painting shadows that swayed across the earthen walls. He'd study the logs, adjust the stones, then whispered to no one in particular, "Let it last till morning." It was not a prayer, and yet somehow it was. Mrs. Thompson would move quietly through the cabin, checking the windows for drafts, pressing her palm against the door to feel the wind's push. Then she'd fold the blankets, shake out the buffalo hides, and tuck the youngest beneath them. The children always protested softly. They wanted to stay awake, to listen to the stories. And so before sleep came the second ritual, the telling. Jake, whenever he was there, would be asked to tell one. Not the grand tales of war or gold or gunfire, but the small ones. The kind that began with, "Once there was a man who forgot what summer felt like," and ended with the faint sound of snoring. Around the firelight, faces glowed warm, eyes half closed. The room filled with the rhythm of breath and ember crackle. In that moment, the night wasn't long. It wasn't cold. It was alive. Outside, the wind hummed softly against the walls, a steady, low lullaby. Snow brushed the roof, whispering as it slid down. The fire popped inside, casting sparks that floated like stars before fading. Mrs. Thompson would hum sometimes, a tune without words, something her mother had sung back east. It mingled with the wind until the two became one sound, human and nature, merging in a single note of survival. Jake often stayed awake longer than the rest. He liked to listen to the shifting logs, to the steady breathing of the children, to the fragile peace that came only after exhaustion. He would check the fire one last time, just as Mr. Thompson had taught him. Add a log, adjust the iron gate, watch as the glow deepened from gold to amber to faint, breathing red. Then, satisfied, he would lie down, pulling the blanket over his shoulders.
The warmth was uneven, hot near the chest, cool near the feet, but it was enough. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and sleep, and in those hours, as consciousness faded, Jake sometimes thought about all the families scattered across the plains doing the exact same thing, feeding their fires, whispering their thanks, and drifting slowly into dreams. He imagined all those small lights, hundreds of them, flickering beneath the same vast sky, each one holding the same fragile wish to wake again. And outside, the snow kept falling. Slow, soft, eternal, like time itself pausing to listen.
By midnight, the world outside the cabin had vanished. The storm had returned, not the violent kind that breaks things, but the soft, smothering kind that turns sound into silence. Snow fell in thick curtains, covering tracks, fences, and even the moon. The wind no longer howled. It breathed, slow, deep, and steady. Inside, the fire burned low, glowing like the heart of something ancient and kind. Jake lay awake, half dreaming, half listening. The walls hummed faintly with the rhythm of the storm. He thought of how small they were, he and the others, wrapped in hides and blankets, floating in the middle of an ocean made of ice and sky. And yet, somehow, he didn't feel afraid. There was a strange comfort in knowing the world had gone quiet, that for these few hours, everything, hunger, fear, longing, had been buried under the same snow. His eyes drifted shut. The fire's light flickered behind his eyelids, turning to images, not of war or wilderness, but of warmth. He saw fields of green, a river shining under summer sun, horses grazing under the cottonwood trees. He saw faces too, the Thompsons laughing, the Lakota dancing, Sarah Mitchell writing her last letter beneath a sky now long gone. They weren't gone, really. They had simply changed form, like water, like snow, like breath. In the dream, the snow was no longer white, but silver. It glowed faintly, like the inside of a pearl. Footsteps appeared, not heavy, but soft, barely touching the ground. He followed them through a forest made of quiet, and somewhere in that stillness he heard it, the sound of many hearts beating, slow, strong, together. The dream had no end. It faded, gently, into the rhythm of sleep. Outside, the storm shifted. The wind turned, carrying the scent of pine and cold air through the chimney. The logs crackled once, as if answering. Within the cabin, no one stirred. Only the fire breathed. By morning, the storm would pass. The tracks would be gone. But the memory of that night, that shared stillness, that fragile, flickering warmth would remain, like an ember buried in snow, waiting for a hand to uncover it again. And though no one would ever write it down, that night, that sleep was what saved them. Not their strength, not their tools,
but their faith in light, even when all they could see was darkness.
It began with a sound, faint, fragile, almost shy, the sound of dripping water. Jake heard it one morning before the sun had risen, a soft rhythm against the frozen ground outside the cabin. At first, he thought it was a dream, but when he opened his eyes, a pale light was already spilling through the window. The storm had passed. The snow, that white wall that had buried the world for months, was beginning to melt. He stepped outside, boots sinking into the half-frozen crust. The air was still cold, but it was a different kind of cold, lighter, cleaner, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine. Around him, icicles hung from the eaves, dripping steady, one drop at a time. It was such a small sound, yet it filled the silence like a song. The world was changing, slowly, tenderly. Patches of brown earth peeked through the melting snow. A bird, the first he'd seen in weeks, darted across the gray sky, calling once before vanishing into the pines. Smoke from nearby cabins rose straight, no longer bent by wind. Everything seemed to be holding its breath, listening to the soft music of thaw. The Thompsons came out too, blinking against the bright morning. The children laughed as they kicked at the snow, their boots splattering mud. Mrs. Thompson tilted her face toward the sun, eyes closed, lips trembling between a smile and a prayer. Mr. Thompson simply stood still, hat in hand, as though greeting an old friend who had finally returned. Jake watched them, and for the first time in months, he smiled without weight. He thought of all the nights they'd endured, the hunger, the storms, the long, sleepless dark, and how quietly, without fanfare, they had made it through. There was no victory here, no medals, no cheers, just survival, humble, radiant, and real. The prairie stretched endlessly before him, glistening with meltwater. The wind was soft again, like a hand brushing his shoulder. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, roots were stirring, finding warmth again. The land was waking. Jake closed his eyes, listening. The drip, drip, drip of melting ice, the distant crack of thawing branches, the murmur of life returning. He whispered, "You kept your promise." And for the first time, he felt the land whisper back.
By the time the rivers began to flow again, life on the prairie had taken on a new rhythm. The people who had survived were not the same as those who had arrived months ago. The cold had shaped them, pared them down to the core of what it meant to be human. Their hands were rougher, their voices quieter, their eyes wiser. And yet there was a light in them, a light that had been tempered, not extinguished. Jake rode through the valley that spring, past cabins built from sod and stone, past barns raised by many hands. Everywhere he saw signs of quiet triumph: new fences, steaming kettles, laundry flapping like white flags of peace in the warming wind. He passed a group of settlers repairing a wagon wheel,
their laughter mixing with the song of a meadowlark. They waved to him, and he raised his hand in return, a small, wordless salute between survivors. Later that day, he stopped at the trading post. Chaska, the Lakota man, was there, mending a pair of snowshoes. "Winter's gone," Jake said with a smile. Chaska shook his head gently. "No," he said. "Winter never leaves, it just changes its name." Jake nodded. He understood. The cold would come again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not soon, but someday. That was the truth of the land. But now they knew how to meet it, not with fear, but with wisdom. Over the months that followed, Jake saw something grow. Not crops or herds, but something invisible. A kind of strength that couldn't be measured in tools or timber. These people had discovered that endurance was not a thing of the body alone. It lived in stories told by firelight, in the shared labor of hands, in the simple kindness of a meal divided. That was the real frontier, not the land they claimed, but the hearts they kept open even when the world froze around them. He began writing again, in a weathered notebook he carried since before the storms. His words were not grand, just small notes, fragments of memory. He wrote of the Thompsons, of Chaska, of the countless nameless faces he had seen fade and reappear with the seasons. They built warmth from nothing, he wrote. They turned survival into grace. Sometimes when he rode through the grasslands, he'd imagined the generations to come. Children who would never know what it meant to face the prairie's cold with only faith and fire. And he hoped that somehow they would still inherit this quiet courage, that it would stay in the soil, in the rivers, in the breath of the wind. Because this, he thought, was the true legacy of the American frontier. Not conquest, not wealth, but resilience born of compassion.
That evening, the sun sank low over the prairie, melting into gold and violet. The snow that remained glowed softly, like the earth was exhaling light. Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the hill, hat in hand, watching the last of the frost dissolve into water. The world felt new, fragile, tender, and impossibly alive. Behind him, the cabins smoked gently, each chimney a quiet beacon. He could hear laughter carried by the wind, the Thompsons, no doubt, and maybe others. It was the sound of life continuing, ordinary and miraculous. For months, they had lived beneath the weight of silence. Now, that silence had turned to song. Jake sat down on a smooth rock, his old journal open on his knees. He traced his fingers over the pages, rereading what he had written, the names, the memories, the moments that had stitched survival into meaning. Then he turned to a fresh page and began the final entry. Spring has come, the snow is leaving, but its lessons remain. It taught us not just how to endure, but how to feel again, to trust the light, even when the night is longest. He paused, the pen hovering. Then he wrote one last line. When you lie in your warm bed tonight,
Remember those who once fought the winter. He closed the book. The wind brushed his face, carrying with it the smell of pine and thawed soil. Somewhere behind him, a door creaked, and a woman's voice called for her children. A dog barked. The prairie was alive again. Jake rose slowly, tucking the journal into his coat. He looked east toward the horizon, the same horizon that once seemed endless, cruel, and cold. Now it looked gentle, forgiving. The frontier had not changed. He had. The sun slipped away, and the first stars appeared, small, patient, and certain. Jake smiled. He whispered a quiet good night to the land, to the people who slept beneath it, to the ghosts who still guarded the fire. And then, as the wind quieted and the light faded, he walked back toward the cabin, toward the laughter, the warmth, the promise that life, no matter how cold it gets, will always find a way back to spring.